Good morning. Well, I'm not at Raven this morning. I'm up here in the town of Sand Lake, New York. Behind me is Teal Pond. 114 years ago, murder happened in Teal Pond. My guest today asks the question, who killed Hazel Drew? The question I ask is, why is it important now, 114 years later?
I don't give a damn about my reputation.
All right, well, welcome back to Quoth the Raven, and we're here with John Holser. John is a filmmaker, and he made a film called Who Killed Hazel Drew? Now, the first question should be, hey, John, who killed Hazel Drew?
Well, then that you would give away the whole thing if we told you who killed her, because it's a murder mystery.
Okay, so Hazel was murdered in 1908. I would imagine that there have been thousands of unsolved murders since 1908. Why a film about Hazel Drew?
So why a film about Hazel Drew? Hazel Drew was murdered on Taborton Mountain in the town of Sand Lake, New York. Oh, we got a little wind now. And I think we're going to come about. And so stand by to come about, and we'll get back to that story in just a second. Why Hazel Drew? Why Hazel Drew with all these cold case murders? So two reasons. One, Hazel Drew was murdered in 1908 on Taborton Mountain in the town of Sand Lake, New York. She was murdered less than a mile from the way the crow flies of my house. At that time, my ancestors, my great-great-grandfather, was living in the house that I now live, and I am absolutely certain that they knew the family, the Drew family as well as the Taylor family.
Okay, I got to stop you here for a minute. Taylor family?
The Taylor family is the farmhouse where Hazel was staying at the time when she was a child, her uncle.
Okay.
So it was Uncle William Taylor, who actually became one of the main suspects. The other main reason to answer your question is Hazel Drew was a scandalous murder in that her life was very secretive, and it inspired Mark Frost, who is the co-creator of Twin Peaks, to create the character Laura Palmer.
Okay, so let's look at Laura Palmer for those who haven't seen Twin Peaks. Laura Palmer's body is found in a lake in the very first episode. She was bludgeoned to death, and she was the all-American girl until she wasn't.
As the case opened up, it was Hazel's letters that were found in her trunk by the detectives or a newspaper man that really uncovered the fact that Hazel was living beyond her means. She was not making enough money to do the things that she was doing. She was buying clothes, and she was traveling, and very likely more, certainly seeing men, which her friends and her family were saying, like Laura Palmer, she was all-American girl, and that meant at that time that she was not seeing men because she was not formally courting in that regard. So she was living a scandalous life based on her letters, which was very contradictory to what everybody around her thought.
Now, in 1908, if I understand, that news reached the West Coast. It was in newspapers in the West Coast. It was in newspapers. This isn't the time of 24-hour news or sensationalist news.
Her death actually made more than national news, but yes, across the nation, there were papers across the nation that picked it up, but there were also papers that came to Sand Lake, and they actually, for probably 3 weeks, stayed in Troy and the area following this murder. It was front page in a lot of cases.
Well, it's interesting that you say Troy, because a lot of her murder centers around things that happened in Troy. Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
And Troy, back at that time, was cosmopolitan, to say the least. It was
Industrial powerhouse of a city. Troy, New York had money coming out of every major person had money. They're making money.
and so
Keep it G-rated.
So just a little point of perspective. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, Troy, New York was the fourth wealthiest per capita city in America. The fourth wealthiest. Now, with that kind of wealth comes a lot of secrets, a lot of power, and a lot of intrigue.
what was Hazel's relationship to Troy, and how did that possibly create her murder?
So Hazel, at the time of her murder, and from the time of when she was 14 years old, she was working in Troy, New York. And she was working in Troy. Her only job ever was as a domestic servant. So she was working as a domestic servant in Troy, New York. And at the time of her murder, they say she was a governess, but Hazel did not have the education to be a true governess. So she was a domestic, maybe with a governor, taking care of some children, doing laundry, and helping take care of the house of Professor Carey, who was a lead engineer at Rensselaer Polytech Institute. Also very politically connected, which if you watch the movie, you're going to find that there's a lot of politics, surprise, going on with Hazel Drew, the district attorney, and a lot of people that are involved in this murder. So Hazel was working in Troy, New York, and meeting all of the powerful people that are involved in this film in Troy, New York. They weren't in Sand Lake unless they were vacationing. They were in Troy, New York, and that's where Hazel's life was really coming around.
Don't give a damn about my reputation.
We're moving along now, pretty
The
good.
next one's going to be a jibe again, if the wind keeps coming from this way.
Yeah, the wind.
Prepare to jibe will be the next.
So what we're talking about here is that the wind has shifted. It is now
What I'm gonna do.
kind of on our starboard, and so we were driving down the Hudson. All right, so you were saying how Hazel was working as a domestic in Troy, very politically powerful people she was working with or working for. How do you think that contributed to her ultimate demise?
Hazel Drew was an incredibly beautiful woman, according to all accounts, even amongst beauties. And we're going to get ready to jibe here in a minute.
Okay, so Job, let's. Do you want a hand with that?
I got it, I think.
Okay,
You
pull
okay
it.
with
Yeah, pull that in.
Jibe. And jibing.
No,
Yep.
jibing. There you go.
And I'm going to get ready to release.
Don't. Yeah, let it out
Yep.
easy. Let it out easy.
I don't give a damn about my reputation. I've never
There we go. Our jib is full. Start letting that sail out easy. Keep the jibe going.
There you go.
There we go.
So we're talking about Troy, New York, and we're talking about Hazel and working for very politically connected people. Do you think that contributed to what happened?
Absolutely. So Hazel was moving amongst powerful people that had a total disregard for young women. I mean, surprise, it's 1908, very paternal society, and Hazel was a beauty amongst beauties, and so she attracted a lot of attention. Now, there's a few ways of moving up in the world, and one of the ways is who you actually associate with. I mean, no surprise. So Hazel might have been uneducated, but she wasn't stupid, and she decided early on, according to all of us, the historians, the people watching this, that she wanted to move up in society. So she started to associate with these people, going on carriage rides with her Aunt Minnie, with men that she would not disclose, very interesting part of the story, and buying clothes to make herself look like she was in a higher class than she was as a governess. But the problem is that, young men, Hazel, of course, would want to be married, and she spoke about being married in this case. But she, being a governess, the high-end men, their families don't want them to marry underneath them. So what does that leave her for the men? And that is, she's a toy, let's say it the nice way, in a lot of ways. She becomes a toy, though she doesn't understand that. She has never been coached, by someone a young woman who understands that. So she got herself into a powerhouse spot that she didn't necessarily know how to wield her power properly and stay out of danger. Like when you're overpowered with sails. If you don't know what you're doing, if I get myself out in a big boat with overpowered sails, I'm likely, with the right boat, to flip because I don't know how to control that kind of power. And Hazel was dealing with that same situation.
Before we get back into seeing who might have killed Hazel Drew, I wanted to just mention that a few weeks ago I met a gentleman named Matt Fleming, whose business on Instagram is Start With a Scribble, and I'll link it in the description. And he made these cool stickers, decals, vinyl decals of my logo. If you want one, watch to the end of the video and I'll tell you how you can get one. Be cool to see it on your car, or on your boat, on your top box, somewhere, on your computer. Again, cool Quoth the Raven decal.
She started to date some people that were involved. One guy was involved with the insurance business. But the problem was some of the men that she was seeing that her aunt knew about, they wouldn't disclose the names. So we don't have the names of some of these political people. One of them who rented a buggy, the same buggy that was found on Teal Pond the night that she was murdered. Those names were never disclosed.
Okay, so let's talk about the buggy and Teal Pond. Right. Now, I had heard that there was the name of certain people who rented a buggy. Is that true or not true?
Well, we ultimately did some. There were names that came up. William Cushing is one of the names that came up of a guy who rented the buggy. Yes, that's correct.
So, who was William Cushing?
William Cushing was, at the time of Hazel's murder, he was a bartender. He was a bartender in the south side of Troy, and but he was also, I think the proper term is, he was an alderman. And so he was also, but I think maybe more interesting is William Cushing was pretty much a foot soldier, but after her death, he climbed in political rank.
Interesting. So William Cushing might have been working for...
Well, in my opinion, William Cushing was working for the man that ultimately ordered Hazel Drew's death.
All right there. That's good. So remember I was saying before that sometimes we think about the river, that the wind is running straight up, but it's not, right? Yeah. So we can head straight down the river right now.
Yep.
Now, if you let out your sail a little bit, let out your mainsail a little bit, and now start to bring it in until you get those telltales flying. One of the really big issues with kind of new sailors and old sailors alike is what they call choking the sails. You pull them too tight, right? And then you're choking off the wind. So
I think I'm doing that right now.
I think so.
There it is. That's better.
Yeah, and you can feel how we picked up speed. Yep. You can also feel how the boat wants to change direction a little bit, right? Yep.
Oh yeah, I think if we knew who killed Hazel Drew, there would not have been the interest in the story for sure. I mean, that's also true. Look at the whole premise, the one narrative thread that runs throughout Twin Peaks. How many episodes the original was who killed Laura Palmer?
Right.
I mean, that was a major thread. There's certainly sub stories beyond that, but now we're coming from the rear. Accidental jibe.
So, John, let me ask you as we kind of wrap up here. If you were to count, raw number, how many suspects would you have in Hazel Drew's murder?
So how many suspects were there in Hazel's murder? Let's just say that there could probably be at least 10. There was at least 10 suspects that were brought up and investigated in Hazel's murder. The district attorney really wanted to pin this on a local. So Uncle Taylor and Frank Smith, the quote, half-witted young man, farmhand, as he was described in the newspapers, got a tremendous amount of attention from the investigators, the district attorney, where a lot of the, some of the people from Troy, politically connected people from Troy, got very little attention, and their names never came out. So maybe 10 suspects ultimately, and they really honed in on, 2 or 3.
Who were probably red herrings.
Who were, in my opinion, they were red herrings for sure.
So let's go back to your opinion. How many actual suspects do you think there were?
The real, when it comes to the investigation, honed in on the Alps camp, a sex camp that was happening in the Alps, and that got covered up. And then there was a man that Hazel said that she could be married to at any time, which was a dentist.
Now, you know that I feel that the dentist had a big role in this.
Yes.
Right? Because there's something in the movie that when I watched it totally blew me away. And that was a guest that you had in the movie who talked about his family history, and not a pretty family history. A family history that possibly genetically was predisposed to murder.
Exactly. So one of the most fascinating things about this project was not knowing where it was going to go, and with the idea that maybe we will figure this out. So I get a call from California from this guy who leaves me a message, and he says, "I believe my grandfather killed Hazel Drew." At first I'm thinking, okay, it's another one of these crackpots. And then I found out that he was a professor that studied the psychopathic brain, and his family was from Troy, and his grandfather was a dentist. So I was now interested.
And one of his relatives, going way back,
one of his relatives is Lizzie Borden.
Lizzie Borden.
I don't give a damn about my reputation. You're living in the past, it's a new generation.
Okay, so if you want to get one of these decals
And a girl's gonna
for free,
what she wants to do.
I have very limited
That's what
quantities,
I'm gonna do.
so this is what you have to do. You have to subscribe to the video channel, you have to comment, and you have to share. If you can do those 3 things, I'll send you one of these, continental US only. Let's say you've already subscribed and you've already commented. Share it. Tell me where you shared it. Let me know you shared it. I'll message you, I'll get your address, and I'll send you one. So again, limited quantities, first come, first serve. It's all about subscribing, sharing, commenting. Thank you.